Hello, fellow writers, and thanks for joining us here at Writing in Progress, a podcast where two full-time teachers share stories and lessons along their journey as aspiring authors. Today, we actually have three teachers in the house, as Rick Thorpe will be sharing his experience writing and publishing East of Anywhere.
Welcome, everyone, and welcome, Rick Thorpe. All right.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I don't want to waste any of our precious time with you this week, so let's get right to it. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you found your passion for writing.
Well, I've always been a reader, and I think that's where most writers start from. And even though I taught writing, I was a little bit scared of writing because it was difficult for me. I think I struggled a little bit with vocabulary. And I think to be a good writer, you have to have a decent vocabulary and good imagination. So I had the imagination, but my mechanics weren't that good. So that was easily something I could improve. But teaching writing to kids, I thought I need to put my money where my mouth is and actually write myself. And I thought it would be pretty cool for the kids to be able to say, well, my teacher has written a book.
That's awesome.
That is cool.
I've written lots of poetry over the years because that was easy and I could get my humor in there, but never really shared them much. That's how that got started.
Well, speaking of poetry, where did the inspiration for East of Anywhere come from? How did it go from an idea to a full-blown novel?
Well, I tossed this around for many, many years. I'd written all these poems that I enjoyed. I didn't share them with very many people. Some of the poems in the book were actually ones I'd written in college, so close to 40 years ago.
Wow.
That's interesting.
Of course, I edited them to make them more present day and fit the character. But anyway, I realized that poetry books aren't that interesting. And even if I had a friend and I said, hey, I wrote this book of poems, they probably would say, oh, great, and would read one or two and then fall asleep. So I thought it would be a lot more interesting if I could somehow put these poems into a novel. And that way, if the poems weren't very good, I could say, well, I wrote them poorly on purpose. It's the character. He's an amateur. It's not me, it's him. That was intentional.
Genius.
That's how that kind of worked. I thought, how can I have other people write these poems? And then I thought of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, one of my favorite books and one of my favorite movies. And they have these sessions every day. And I thought, well, that's how I'll do this. I'll make this some kind of therapy.
That's funny you say that, Rick, because I was very secretive with a lot of my work, too. It's kind of funny. The first person that really read my novel, I think, or not my novel, but my book all the way through was an agent. And she was shocked that other people hadn't been reading this.
Yeah, well, I wasn't sure I was going to pursue this, but once I thought, I'm going to try this, and I wasn't sure if it was any good, but I did not know my youngest son, Eli, was secretly reading it every night after I was finished typing. And he said, hey, I've got a confession to make. I've been reading your book and I really like it.
That's awesome.
That's great.
That gave me a little bit more confidence to keep going.
I think that's so key. John and I talked a little bit about that last week, how just hearing that one other person who's read your story and connected with it can give you a lot of motivation.
Yeah, I gave it to my our librarian there at school, and almost a lot of the same situation, Rick. She gave it to her daughter. Her daughter had picked it up, and she came to me and said, my daughter's reading this, and she loves it. Is it okay if she reads it? And I said, yeah, sure. But it was funny because all of a sudden it was appealing to a senior in high school, too, and I didn't anticipate that. And so I was like, I think I might have something here.
Yeah, it only takes a little bit of push from somebody or a thumbs up from a couple people, and I too shared it with a couple people at school, and I had to trust them that they were pulling my leg, that they really liked it.
Oh, yeah. So in an earlier episode, Justin and I each went through our writing process. We'd like to hear, what does your writing process look like?
Well, for this book, I started the old school notebook. Took a spiral notebook with me on vacation, and purple is kind of a lucky color for me for some reason, so I wrote it in a purple notebook with a purple pen and skipped every other line, and it had coffee spilled on it and seawater bled all over the place. Once I filled it, I just started transferring everything to the computer and never went back to paper again.
Right.
But I would find myself writing for, I'm sure you guys are the same way. You get 15 minutes here or there.
Yeah.
Or I'd get an idea and I would go back and change things and add an idea. It might be just one line or a comment. And I've even done that and gone back and seen that I'd already done it. Oh, that's really funny. Oh, yeah, I thought it was funny 2 months ago when I wrote it the first time.
Rick, our processes are a lot alike. I've even woken up in the middle of the night and gone down and found that notebook and found the one spot where I wanted to add that in because I'm afraid I would forget it.
Yeah.
And then gone back to bed.
Yeah. If I have trouble sleeping, I will get up and write. Oddly, I like to have some background noise because I think I'm so used to that. Like when I was writing on vacation, I didn't go off where it was quiet. I was around people, and I would write here in the room I'm in now, like our little library, there's a TV here. I'd turn the TV on. I kind of like that background noise because if I had kind of a block, it was easy for me just to turn around and watch TV for a few minutes and then get back into it.
I do that too sometimes.
Same way at school. I don't know if you guys write while you're teaching.
I think our principal listens to this podcast. So,
okay.
Never.
Well,
never.
When there's a break in the action, or for when my kids were working on something and I came up with an idea, I could write while there was background noise.
Interesting.
It was tough for me to write after school, but before school was a good time to write. I had to have energy. If I was low on energy, it was very difficult to write.
Yeah.
So we kind of already touched on this one, but just to see if there's anything you'd want to add, I thought your concept of building a novelized story around poetry was very interesting and intriguing. And you even used images. We haven't really talked about that yet. Photography was part of the story. Yeah. So where did that inspiration come from, and how did you adopt that plot structure?
That's neat.
Thank you. I've always liked adding black and white photos to my poems. But as the character in the book talks about, this was the truth. There's a book that I found in our library called The Gift of a Watermelon Pickle. And these experts had interviewed thousands of middle school kids. What's your favorite poem? What's your favorite poem? They really wanted to find the best poems that middle school kids liked. Well, of course, a lot of them were adult poems, Langston Hughes, Walt Whitman, Robert Frost. But they had added black and white photos with them. And I really liked that. So I started doing it with mine. And I thought, well, I'm going to have this happen with the characters too, because I thought it'd be kind of fun and it would fill some space.
What I found as I was reading your book, I'm one of those guys who I don't read ahead, but I kind of flip through the book as I go, and it was interesting to just flip through the book a little and see the images and in my head try and imagine how we were getting to that image, whether it was milk flying through the air or whatever other.
Yeah.
Kind of branching off that, just something I'm curious about is, did that come up at all when you were searching for your publisher? Did that kind of narrow down your search at all?
No, I thought that some people were going to say, bag the photos. It doesn't work. Well, then I've got to rewrite everything because they talk about the photos and the whole process and everything. But I actually had one publisher who was interested in the photos, but not the book.
Really?
Yeah.
The characters in your book are really well done. How did you create their individual voices? Were there real life inspirations for your characters, or how did you do that?
Well, I went and saw Gary Paulson at Ohio Wesleyan many years ago. He wrote the book Hatchet and several other books that young people like. And he said, write what you know. And I thought it's going to be hard. Well, that's one reason. And later, I've got to be able to do this, but write in the voice of a woman. So it's all male characters. And I felt better doing that, more comfortable doing that. And I didn't want to get too far away from my own personality. So all those guys aren't too far away from me. There's sides of me that I'm either comfortable acting like or I think a little bit like. But I had to make them diverse enough to make it not boring. I wanted to make it interesting. And they, of course, had to have conflict. So they had to butt heads a little bit. But I really, as I was acting like each of those guys, I would take on their personality. I would have their posture. I would sit like I think they would sit.
Interesting.
Cool.
Daniel would sit upright, strong, and be very thoughtful. Ish would have a smirk on his face and be slouching. Ed would be very relaxed and calm. And I would sometimes, at the beginning, I was even wearing like different clothing that they would wear, especially when I was doing the poetry. like the re-editing of the poems in their voice, try to get into their heads a little bit. I don't have to do that now, but that's what I did in the beginning.
Method writing, huh?
Yeah, I like it. I like it.
Yeah, cool. I forget which character it was. I read the book about a year and a half ago, but the one who was, I think he was a retired cop who lived on the farm.
Yes.
I was definitely picturing your farm in my head as I was reading
Made it
about him.
a lot easier to write for him and his day-to-day things, because that's what I do here. And I thought it would be better if I had him retired policeman, so I didn't have to write too much about police work since I'm not that familiar with law enforcement.
All right, so you dedicated the book to your father, and in East of Anywhere, George, his father originally started the class that all the characters are in. What role did your father's memory play as you worked through East of Anywhere?
Well, really the character Matty, his thoughts about his father and his poem is actually, that poem is my dad. That's me writing about my dad. And I thought that was the easiest way to write about the loss of a person if you've actually experienced that. And the loss of Ed's partner. That's a friend of mine, Mary Pat, who actually had committed suicide. And I wrote that poem in honor of her about 17, 18 years ago. So that's a poem I actually wrote for a friend.
Wow.
But my dad was an avid reader. He would have been so proud of this. And he came from very humble beginnings. I think he would have loved it. A little sad, of course, that he's not around to have read it.
I think that's the key, though, Rick. You wrote something really for someone else that all of us get to read and take part in. And I think that's the best literature, to be honest with you. I know when I wrote my book, it's for my daughters. It is.
Yeah.
And someday, if you guys get to read it, that'll be awesome for you. But it's for my kids. Let's move on a little bit to what the revision process looked for you and the editing. How did you edit this? Did you hire an editor? How many times did you revise this before you felt that it was ready to be published? How did it change from what you started with to maybe what you ended up with?
Well, since I had zero confidence, and when I told an artist friend about this book idea, she said, it sounds like it'd make a great play. So I wrote it like it was a script.
Okay.
And that wasn't that difficult to do, write it like a script, because you're not really describing what the characters are doing, their facial expressions. And well, I sent it to a friend. She said, man, this doesn't work. It'd be so much better as a novel.
Mm-hmm.
So I was mad and embarrassed, and I'm glad she said it. So I redid the whole thing. Didn't even keep that script. I edited the whole thing from that script, just rewrote it. And it wasn't as bad as I thought.
Interesting.
So as far as the editing goes, I have a friend who's well, first of all, Black Rose Publishers gave me a list of editors. Well, their prices were astronomical.
Right.
So I have a friend who is a very respected English teacher in Upper Arlington. She's retired. And I asked her if she would do it, and she was thrilled. She loved doing that kind of thing. So it didn't take her that long. She was very honest with me. Like she'd say, this is a cliche, and
right.
This is kind of clunky, but it wasn't that bad. And a lot of little, of course, grammar mistakes, a comma here, semicolon. And that did not take me. She just took my printed copy and red marker like a teacher would do, put them on there, and then I just page by page took all of her editing. And then I had another friend do the same thing, just in case she missed something, and went through it again. And other than that, Black Rose did not do any editing at all. So that was all on me.
Gotcha.
Interesting.
Now, that process of going script to novel, how long did it take to convert?
Redo it? Not that long. Just a couple weeks. The hard part was point A to point B.
Right.
But I already had in my head what they were doing, and I had to make it interesting. And I didn't want to say said over and over again.
Right.
But it started to flow and get easier and easier. And then I would refer to books that I was currently reading and see how that author had done it. So I used a lot of imitation to get where I wanted to be.
Yeah.
It's hard in my novel, the scenes where there's just two characters talking,
Right.
You don't always even need to add a tag.
Exactly.
because you can just know, well, this person says this person responds. When you've got 3, 4, 6 people in a room, you always have to tag it so they know who's talking. And it does get difficult to find ways of making that not repetitive.
And making sure that you just don't have a page of dialogue and then a page of dialogue. I guess a lot of script writers and playwriters go into writing novels and things. And when agents get them submitted, they know, okay, this guy writes scripts because we have 17 pages of dialogue here in a row. So breaking that up is sometimes difficult as well.
Well, here's another reason I made an introduction to each character at the beginning of the book.
I really liked that. I was hooked on that.
That came last.
Really?
Interesting.
Here's the reason. I gave it to several of my buddies, and they said, man, I got really confused with who was who. And I do that when I read books. When there's a bunch of characters,
I agree.
Especially if they've got Scandinavian names or Russian names, and you cannot keep track of which character is which. And then you're like, I'm not getting the feel for each of their personalities. Well, when I added that at the beginning, I think I already knew what their personalities were like because I'd already finished a book with these guys.
Right.
So adding that at the beginning was easy, and I could do a little foreshadowing there, which made it kind of fun. And I did that really rapidly. I did like each guy in one day.
Wow.
And people said, yes, this made it a lot clearer. When they were talking, I kind of already had a feel for who was who. Or they could refer back to the beginning of the book. Now, who's Maddie again? They just flip the beginning and say, okay, Maddie's the kid.
Yeah.
So I think it was helpful.
That's interesting. Yeah, I kind of a similar experience with my characters. I've been working on this book for years, and just recently I kind of had the epiphany of, what if I have a few short chapters that just shifts point of view, where I go spend a couple pages with someone who's not the main character. And I found doing that, not only for the book, but for me as the author, gave them so much more depth. Just spending a few pages with them gave them a lot more personality that you could work with as you went.
I was working on a piece recently, and it was young me in parts of it, and current me, or married with kids me, in other parts of it. And I was trying to figure out, how do I let the reader know right away which me this is before getting into it? I decided to go bold and italics on the two parts. So as soon as you see italics, you know it's current me. And then when you see the bold me, that's me from the singlehood
I've
past.
seen some authors where they put the date, like 1985, then it's the younger version.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
A couple thoughts I had coming off this too. One thing Neil Gaiman said, with all his characters, he tries to give them a funny hat. Now that's figurative, of course, but he tries to give each character one really quirky thing that stands out so that it's just that kind of cheat way so the reader knows who that person is. Another thing I've found in those dialogue moments that feel a little too scripted, where he said, she said, he said, she said, in dialogue, I always try to have my characters doing something while they're talking, even if it's having dinner, taking a dramatic bite breaks that up,
Yep.
Yeah, that's great, because I had that trouble with those guys who were always, for the most part, they're sitting around in chairs.
Right.
So you didn't want to say smirk over and over again, or lean forward, or stared at his hands. I mean, you can only say that so many times.
Right. Yeah. I will go back and edit a chapter and I'll be like, man, this guy sighed 7 times.
Luckily, my characters are little kids and they never sit still. So they're forever doing something. This is not an issue.
Awesome. We'll keep moving forward here. In the end, when you finished the revision process, you chose to go the indie publishing route, which a lot of people are really interested in, instead of signing with an agent or self-publishing. How did you come to that decision? And if you were sent back in time to when you made the decision, would you do anything differently?
Well, I think I would try to get an agent.
Okay.
And which I did try, but I just sent it out to agents, publishing companies, and I read a little bit about everybody to see what they were interested first before I mailed anything to them. I kind of assumed the indie route would be a better route. I was kind of thinking, if this is going to go in a bookstore, it would be not a Barnes and Noble, but some little quirky mom and pop type bookstore,
right?
Maybe a hippie shop where odd little things like I consider my book would fit in. I knew it wasn't a blockbuster. That's not what I wrote. I just, kind of wrote that for myself. But I don't know that I would do much different. I think I would really polish up my sales pitch, because these agents, they see so much stuff.
Yeah.
And it probably is very monotonous to hear what people think are all these great ideas. And into the trash can. So I don't know. I think I would like to, if the second book, I'm going to look for an agent because I want them to do all the work that I know nothing about.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, it's a business. There's no doubt
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, there's a whole nother side to this that I was unaware of that I'm learning of very quickly, sometimes in the hard ways. So you went with Black Rose Writing to publish your book. How did you end up finding them?
Well, I wrote to all these publishing companies that would be interested in something like mine. So that eliminated a lot of the companies that were looking for certain stuff,
Right.
only looking for science fiction.
What resource did you use to figure that out?
I knew you'd ask that. There's a great book that comes out every year, and it's not like the Writer's Almanac, but it's like the Writer's Guide to publishing. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep. We've talked about it on here before.
Yeah, episode 3, Woolley talked all
that's
about
kind of
it.
your Bible.
It's coming out tonight.
This is what I did. I started at the back and worked my way forward. Because I figured everybody is going to get burnt out by the time they get to
That's interesting.
G. So I started the Z's, and I just bought a copy so I could mark in it.
That's what I did too.
Yeah, and just put like check marks. And then I even
used
wrote
a
in the
highlighter.
date.
I highlighted everything.
I wrote in the date when I mailed something to them, so I
did
wouldn't
that too.
send stuff to people twice.
Right.
So I looked for agents in there. I looked for small publishing companies, and then as I got feedback, I had a couple agents interested. Then they looked at it a little bit more. It was like, I like the idea, but I didn't really like the book that much. So I'm like, I had another company, Archway Press out of Philadelphia. They were really excited, but I already signed with Black Rose. So I was a little disappointed because I wondered if I would have had a different experience. Not that the Black Rose experience has been bad.
You just wonder.
Yeah, you're just curious. So, the next book, the book I'm working on now, I'm not going to send anything out to anybody until I'm done with it.
Right.
Most people like that. They don't like, just an idea or half a book. They really do prefer it be finished.
The cool thing, though, Rick, is a lot of people don't realize it's a huge deal if an agent even asks to see your work. Yeah. Like a lot of authors are really, I know I wrote an earlier novel and I had a big time agent ask to see it and they were not interested. And I was, this is horrible. I soon realized when I started processing the numbers, going to different writers, conferences and stuff, if someone asked to see your stuff, you made it really far. You should be excited about that. I didn't realize that till later.
Well, I was in contact with this one agent back and forth for a while. And she finally said, I don't really know if this is going to fly. I would like to send her a copy.
Yeah.
Not to stick it in her face, but hey, now that this is done, and it's a lot different now than what I showed you.
And I bet she'll want to look at your next one too, because a lot of times they remember and they want to see the next thing that comes from that author.
Yeah. So I might have to do that because that, got me pumped up and I was real close to latching onto that.
Right.
Well, and I think there's something to be said. If you get to the point where you're making the second book and you've already finished that first book, even if you went the self-publishing route or the indie publishing route, just showing you had the discipline to see it through to the end is probably attractive to a lot of agents because they know that you've got what it takes to at least see it all the way through.
A lot of big-time authors were indie authors first.
Yeah.
And it does give you some credibility right away in that someone else in this industry saw this and took it all the way to publication. And it sold copies to other people. Yeah. That says something right away.
And I never thought about this till just now. I can say to them, hey, check out my reviews on Amazon.
That's right.
My first book. Because those have been really positive, and I think
that's a really big deal. That's a really big deal. And you have those people that bought your first book, and you can go to someone and say, hey, I know at least 500, 800 people that'll be very interested in my next book. So that's at least a starting point that a lot of people don't have.
All right. So going along the same line here, how did you market your book? How much of it fell on you versus Black Rose? I saw you have a little bit on social media there. You did some book tours. Tell us a little bit about that and how people could purchase your book.
Well, Black Rose had some options for them to help you publish it, but all with a price tag. Well, I didn't want to do that. So they said, then you need to get on Facebook. You need to have a Twitter account. You need to do Instagram. You need to do all this stuff. So I had none of that stuff. So I got on Facebook, started talking about it. I had a few friends from high school who really wanted to help me push this. So they started getting the word out. They helped me line up the book clubs, set up a thing in my hometown of Troy, Ohio, the Cultural Center, which they love that kind of stuff, having a
Cool.
homegrown
Yeah.
author come. So I had a lot of teachers come who couldn't believe I could write my name, let alone a book. And
That's awesome.
That's great.
old parents of friends of mine. So it's really neat. And then the pictures of that got more interest out, and started doing more book clubs and taking pictures and putting those on Facebook. Some Jonathan Alder teachers had a book club, and they invited me. Had a great time with those ladies. That was a lot of fun. Got one in Cincinnati coming up that got canceled due to the COVID thing, but these group, it's mostly ladies. I don't think I've been to one book club yet that's had any men. But that's okay. It seems like middle-aged to older women are the spot for the group who likes my book the best.
Right.
That's interesting because your book is almost 100% male, right? So, but John and I have actually talked in the past. We've kind of experienced similar things.
Yeah. My followers on Facebook are 81% women with kids. So
yeah, it's a book about fathers.
You know, I thought surely I'm going to be selling this to dads. They're going to be all over this. And then I talked to some of my friends' wives, and I said, "How many books does your husband read a year?" And they were like, "I buy him books all year, and I would say he reads none." I said, "How many books do you read?" And she's like, "Oh, I read a book a month or something." And I was like, "You're my audience."
That's true. And it shocks me because in the house I grew up in, my mom never read, and my dad was constantly reading.
Right.
So that
is the opposite.
That was my role model.
That's interesting.
And my own boys read. Well, of course, my daughter reads, but reading is like breathing to me. I have to read every single day.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because that was kind of part of the reason why we thought we had a pretty unique idea here with this podcast. Yeah. We literally said in our first episode, when you think of a book club, you don't really think about guys talking about books, right? And we thought there was space for that. So it's pretty cool to have 3 local aspiring authors here, one already published, talking about it, and hopefully more people get in the conversation.
Now for something a little taboo, but most aspiring authors are very curious about. Would you be willing to speak to the financial side of publishing a book? How much do you see from each copy sold? That type of thing. I know it's different for indie and it's different for each type, but we're trying to find out about each type. There's the old saying, you get $1 a book. I get $4 a book. We don't know. We don't know where you're coming from, but it's very interesting to us.
Well, I want to give you all the numbers because I have like an 8-page contract that has all that spelled out for me, what the percentages are. All I can tell you is the first 500 books I sold, I got a check for $500. So it seemed I was getting like $1.
There you go.
Which I didn't think was too bad.
True.
I really didn't think that was that bad.
Mm-hmm.
So the next 500 I sold, I got much less because a lot of them were ebooks.
Okay.
You don't see much for an ebook because they're not very expensive, you know. So you're getting a very small
that is interesting.
cut of that.
Because I would think on the flip side, though, it doesn't cost your publisher much to produce.
It's all digital, right?
Yeah.
And their bookshelf there is just endless.
So if you don't mind sharing, how many copies have you sold, roughly?
I haven't looked for a while. At about 1,000, I quit looking.
Gotcha.
I had spent a lot of time pushing, but I think I could have done a better job with the social media. There's been a couple things I've turned down, like going to bookstores and speaking at bookstores. I just don't have a whole lot of confidence I would do well on those. But a book club, man, you got an audience who've already read the book. They want you there. So I kind of like doing that, even though you're preaching to the choir because they like you or they wouldn't have you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But hopefully they'll tell friends. And I keep throwing it out there, man. Feed me, I'll come, man. You know, I'll talk. Have a nice couple snacks, beverage. I'm there.
I'm there. Yeah.
And word
Rick
of mouth,
never turns
man,
down a couple of snacks.
No. Give me a big pot of roast beef.
Yeah, I think that idea is so cool. It's funny. That idea never crossed my mind in like a marketing. You know, I definitely was thinking social media, that kind of stuff. And I was looking through your Facebook group and seeing all these pictures from book clubs. And I I think
Yeah.
that's such a cool idea, just for the experience of talking to people who have read your work and analyzing it further. I think that sounds awesome.
Yeah, really cool.
And you'll find this. The questions they ask, they really make you think. I mean, it doesn't put you on the spot or anything, but I was
Right.
like, wow, why did I have Daniel do this? And why did I have this character do that? And sometimes I don't know. I just did, But you leave feeling so good because they wanted you to be there, and
Right.
they're awesome. It's fun.
I'm jealous. I'm fired up. I want to go to the book club. All about
Yeah,
this.
I'm telling you, it's a good time. It's a good time. I really enjoyed it.
Have you ever had someone ask you something and then you're like, oh man, I should have done that?
Yeah, they've made some suggestions that I thought, wow, if a second edition ever comes out, I'm throwing that in there.
Yeah.
There you go. All right. Is there anything you've learned from the publishing and marketing side that you wish you knew a few years ago? If you could pick like one piece of advice you would have told yourself before this, what would it be?
I think be patient. I really jumped on the Black Rose thing because I was starting to panic that nobody was going to be interested, because it takes people a long time to get through all the submissions. So be patient.
Rick, that's one of the things I brought up in an earlier episode. I had no idea how slow publishing moves. And I understand why. There's 100 books sitting there that someone has to go through. I sent something back to my agent, and she's awesome. It was months and months before she could get back to me. And then she sent it out to publishers with a warning that, hey, this is going to take a long time.
Yeah, and when Black Rose got a hold of me, and then, like I said, the Arch Press place in Philly, I thought, did I jump on this too soon? Should I have waited? But like, beggars can't be choosers.
Right.
If this was your living, that would be different. But if you're just wanting to hold a copy of something you wrote in your hands.
Exactly. You'll do anything.
And as long as it's not going to, be wary of, hey, if you send us X amount of money,
right.
I'm not doing it. I didn't want a vanity thing, where, oh yeah, this is the next best thing, man. Send us $1,000 and we'll get the ball rolling.
Right.
Everything I've read has said if a publisher is asking you for money, say no.
Yeah.
In today's world of you can self-publish, there's no reason to pay a publisher. Yeah.
Correct. Same thing with an agent. An agent should not ask you for money. If they're asking you for money, they're not a legit agent. Period.
Yeah.
Period. Agents make money off of their sales. They do not make money on the front end. There should not be reading fees. There should not be all kinds of things mixed into that.
That's the one thing I would love about having an agent, the fact that they're going to work hard, because the harder they work, for me, the more money they get. And I think that's awesome.
Correct. That's correct. So what's next for you, Rick? What are you working on now?
I'm working on a book. It's called Romeo Gillette right now. That's the character's name. And it's about, and oddly, it fits right in with the times. And it's going to help my writing. A white foster kid is placed in with a black family.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Interesting.
So I want this kid not to be just flat out racist prejudice. I think that's too easy. But I want him to have a little bit of an edge, which a lot of foster kids do because they have trust issues, obviously, some of them. So he's put in this home. There's a couple other kids in there. Of course, you got to have some tension and conflict. And he's got some subtle prejudices that he's going to see are not true. They're not there. And of course, I've got to throw teachers in there. So I'm going to have some experiences with some teachers at school as well, which I think will be one of my fun things to write about, because I can live vicariously through these teachers. They will be able to say and do things that I wish I had the guts to say and do.
That's awesome.
So far so good. I'm having a lot of fun writing, and I think this will be, I do have them use a little foul language because I think that's the real world, especially for a kind of a rough kid. So I don't want to scare away a young audience, but it's written more for young adult to adult.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to bring up, because in a very early version of my manuscript, I made sure there was no cussing. I was almost afraid to cuss in it. And I sent it out, and something I got back constantly was, this feels like you're pulling punches. In the real world, this person would not say, darn it,
Right.
Yeah, it is kind of scary to do it. I think especially all three of us are teachers, we're kind of taught to
Right.
filter ourselves, and it's hard to put out something that's not like that.
Did you see how I got around it in my book?
No, why don't you speak to it?
One of the rules,
Oh yeah, that's right.
the guy said, my father said no, which I don't think a real therapist would ever say, no foul language, because that's going to happen. These guys were guys that had been around, there's going to be some really crude language. And I just didn't want to go there because I knew for a fact some of my students were going to read the book. And they did. Even though I didn't tell them about it, they found out. I think a parent or some found out. And sure enough, the kid gets on Amazon, buys the book, and reads it.
Yep.
And I also think that anytime you go down that road, you cut out some of your potential audience. Not that you shouldn't be true to your writing, be true to yourself.
Yep.
But in my own writing, I know that in my area, very quickly, the daddy blogs and mommy blogs, they go very crude quickly. And I've really tried to say, I'm not ever going to do that. Yeah. I'm not ever going to do that. So you read my stuff, you can hand it to your grandma. You don't have to worry about it. Yeah. So I think there's different paths there for different people.
Yeah.
In the end, I mean, you always hear about that kind of hard to define thing. You find your voice, right?
Yes.
And different people have different voices.
Absolutely.
Stephen King is going to drop dozens of F-bombs in his book. That's just how Stephen King writes.
His voice, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're all different. There's no one answer that fits everyone. Okay, so kind of getting to the end here, Rick, where can people follow you or connect with your work? Do you have any social media things you'd like to plug or anything like that?
Well, not really, just the Facebook. I do have a Facebook site or whatever for East of Anywhere. I should probably create a web page, but I'm afraid I wouldn't have anything to add to it. Even my Facebook stuff slowed down because of the lack of being able to go to book clubs. I don't know. It's not that I've lost interest in East of Anywhere, but I feel like I just don't want to beat a dead horse.
Rick, I put together an author page, and then you can add that and then your new book onto that. So I've actually done a huge amount of research on this recently. I have an author page now, jonwoolleyauthor.com. And I was also like, I must make a car seat conversations page. And I'm going to make a web page for that and all this. And then the more I researched it, everyone was kind of like, you make an author page and then put that into the author page. Then your new book will go into the author page. And it'll be one central site where people can come. And another thing you can do is try to collect those emails of those people that got your first book somehow through your author site, offer them something. Hey, this is a chapter that didn't make it. And they give you your email, you give them that chapter. And then the next publisher, you can say, hey, I have 800 emails ready to go of people very interested in my next book. And that's a big selling point.
Cool. I like that.
Yeah, that's good advice. And anyone listening outside the show, I'm going to make sure I get all of Rick's Facebook groups and that kind of thing, a link to where you can buy the book, and it'll all be in the description of our episode. So if you're listening and want more information, check the description. Okay, so that will wrap up this week of Writing in Progress. We want to give a huge thank you to Rick Thorpe for joining us today. This was really fun. If you haven't yet, please check out his book, East of Anywhere. Again, it's going to be linked in the description. I can honestly tell you I couldn't put it down. I read the whole thing within a couple of days. I remember sitting on track buses reading through the book, and I genuinely enjoyed it. I felt a real connection with his characters and their bittersweet journeys together. It was very interesting and heartfelt how they dealt with their grief and loss.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate your kind words and your advice, and this was really a lot of fun. I think what you're doing is awesome, and I wish you the best of luck. I can't wait to read your books. See ya.
And thank you for tuning in. If you found this episode helpful, please consider subscribing to Writing in Progress on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Liking, rating, and or commenting will help us grow this podcast to its full potential. Plus, we're genuinely excited to hear from and engage with our listeners.
Make sure you tune in next Monday at 7 o'clock. We're going to have a new how-to series, and the first episode, John and I are going to have a little debate, so that should be fun. We're going to debate the importance of story elements. What's the most important? What's the least important?
Once again, I'm Jon Woolley, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram as Car Seat Conversations, or on the web at jonwoolleyauthor.com.
And I'm Justin Creps. The best way to keep up with my writing is on Instagram, where my handle is at @J_M_Creps, or YouTube as Justin Creps.
Until next time, work the process the work, keep writing. You got this.